Los Zetas began in the late 1990s when members of Mexico's elite airborne special forces deserted and turned into the paramilitary wing of the Gulf Cartel. Some had received training from US forces while serving in the military, combining paramilitary tactics, advanced weaponry, and discipline. Based in Nuevo Laredo, across the border from Texas, the Zetas quickly became notorious for their extreme brutality, using beheadings, torture, and mass attacks as a strategy of terror. In 2010, they formally broke away from the Gulf Cartel, running their own thing. At their height, the Zetas were the largest cartel in Mexico, rivaling the Sinaloa cartel, and expanding their operations internationally. They stood out for openly targeting civilians. Their crimes included the 2008 grenade attack in Morelia, the 2010 massacre of 72 migrants in Tamaulipas, the 2011 attack on civilians in San Fernando, and the mass killings in Allende, where hundreds of civilians were executed. Zetas often forced victims into gladiator-style death matches, fighting for survival or recruitment. Under Miguel Trevino Morales, their violence escalated further, with reports of him personally murdering thousands. The group also drew US attention when they ambushed ICE agent Jamie Zapata in 2011. Their leadership took heavy hits with the death of Heriberto Lascano in 2012 and later the arrests of the Trevino brothers. Eventually, the cartel split into rival factions. Einsatzgruppen were mobile SS paramilitary death squads created under Heinrich Himmler and directed by Reinhard Heydrich, later Ernst Kaltenbrunner, to carry out mass killings during World War II in German-occupied Europe. They systematically liquidated Jews, Romani people, communists, partisans, and members of the Polish intelligentsia. Almost all their victims were civilians. Their operations followed a grim routine, entering towns, rounding up victims, taking their possessions and marching them to ravines or mass graves where they were executed. Public hangings were also used as a means of terror. The squads worked closely with order police battalions and received logistical support from the Wehrmacht, enabling large-scale massacres such as Babi Yar, where over 33,000 Jews perished in 2 days, and Rombula, with about 25,000 deaths. The Einsatzgruppen didn't have enough personnel to wipe out all the Jews, so they recruited an auxiliary force of 10,000 police officers and 33,000 locals in July 1941. Historians estimate that the Einsatzgruppen and collaborating units took out at least 1 million people. Plans also extended beyond Eastern Europe. Einsatzkommando Egypt, led by Walter Rauf, was prepared in 1942 to carry out attacks on Jews in Egypt and Mandatory Palestine. Similarly, if the planned invasion of Britain had gone ahead, 6 Einsatzgruppen were set to follow the invasion force. Ustaše was a Croatian fascist and ultra-nationalist organization active from 1929 to 45. During World War II, it ruled the Axis puppet state of the independent state of Croatia and carried out mass killings, forced conversions, and genocide against Serbs, Jews, Roma, and political dissidents. Led by Ante Pavelic, the Ustaše implemented the 3-3 policy. Expel 1/3 of Serbs, forcibly convert 1/3 to Catholicism, and execute the remaining third, resulting in hundreds of thousands of deaths. The group was notorious for extreme brutality, including public massacres such as the 1941 Glai Church massacre, sadistic executions, and concentration camp operations, shocking even Nazi observers. Their terror tactics aimed to control a multi-ethnic population and suppress resistance, including during Operation Fall Weiß in 1943, which failed to eliminate the Yugoslav partisans and strengthened the resistance. By early 1945, the Ustaše regime collapsed, with many leaders, including Pavelic, fleeing abroad to evade justice. Janjaweed is an Arab militia that emerged in Sudan during the 1980s insurgencies in Darfur. The Sudanese government began arming and supporting them, using the group as a counter-insurgency force when rebellion broke out in Darfur in 2003. The Janjaweed carried out systematic assaults on African villages, shooting men and boys, violating women, burning homes, and displacing communities. Attacks like those on Bendi and Kaduli marked the beginning of widespread atrocities, while the 2004 assault on Tawila, conducted with government forces, became one of the most infamous ones. The Janjaweed's operations relied on surprise dawn attacks, surrounding villages, blocking escape routes and launching coordinated strikes on multiple communities at once. Their campaign of ethnic cleansing in Darfur between 2003 and 2007 killed an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 people, with the US government officially declaring it genocide. In 2013, the Sudanese government reorganized the Janjaweed into the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group fighting rebels. This shift gave the militias new legitimacy and resources. Wagner Group is a Russian state-funded private military company. It first emerged during the Donbass conflict in 2014, supporting Russian separatists, and later played a major role in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, recruiting prisoners for frontline combat. Wagner operates internationally, backing regimes aligned with Russia in Syria, Libya, the Central African Republic, Mali and Sudan. In Syria, they protected Assad's energy resources in exchange for a share of oil production. In Africa, they provide security to regimes in return for diamond and gold mining contracts. They have been accused of widespread war crimes, including murder, torture, robbery of civilians and executing deserters. The group has peaked around 50,000 personnel, using front companies to funnel resources to the Kremlin. Their activities extend across at least 4 continents, often in conflict zones like Darfur, where they have supported militias such as the Janjaweed. Founder Prigozhin criticized the Russian Defense Ministry for mismanaging the Ukraine war. In June 2023, he led a brief armed rebellion against the Russian government, seizing Rostov-on-Don before an agreement ended the mutiny. Prigozhin and top Wagner commanders died in a plane crash in August 2023. The group is expected to continue operating, adapting to Russia's strategic interests. Los Ántrax was formed in 2008 as the Sinaloa cartel's most feared enforcer unit, created to protect leaders like Ismael El Mayo Zambada and to eliminate rivals through targeted hits. Based in Culiacán, the group became infamous for brutal murders and public displays of violence, with members wearing diamond-studded skull rings as symbols of their power. One of their most notorious figures is René Velázquez Valenzuela, known as El Gato Negro, recognized for his cruelty and distinctive look. Los Ántrax played a major role in violent cartel conflicts, including the 2010 gun battle in Sonora against the Beltrán Leiva cartel, supported by Los Zetas, which left around 30 people dead. They also clashed with Mexican authorities, most notably in 2011 when soldiers took out 3 members during a firefight in Culiacán and freed several kidnapped victims. The group's leader, El Chino Ántrax, was arrested at Amsterdam's airport in 2013, extradited to the US and sentenced to 10 years. After being put on house arrest, he escaped in 2020 and returned to Mexico, where he was soon executed along with his sister and brother-in-law, allegedly by Sinaloa gunmen. Although most of Los Ántrax are dead or imprisoned, remnants are led by El Chelo, who maintains influence in Sinaloa and challenges the Los Chapitos faction. Shabiha were Syrian militias loyal to the Assad family, active primarily during the early phase of the Syrian civil war and later incorporated into paramilitary groups like the National Defense Force. Originating in the 1980s to smuggle weapons to Syrian forces in Lebanon, they gained a reputation for brutality. During the 2011 uprising, the Shabiha acted as regime mercenaries, targeting protesters and opposition figures. In Latakia, they opened fire on demonstrators, killing dozens, and participated in other operations, including the killing of 21 protesters in Homs in April 2011. They were implicated in major atrocities such as the Hula massacre in May 2012, where 108 people lost their lives, and the Al-Kubair massacre with further deaths. The Shabiha were often deployed with army units, carrying out scorched earth campaigns in cities such as Banias and Jableh, burning crops, ransacking homes, and shooting civilians. The Interahamwe is a paramilitary group formed in 1990 as the youth wing of Rwanda's then ruling MRND party, backed by the Hutu power government. led by Robert Kajuga. They were the primary perpetrators of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, with an estimated 500,000 to 1 million deaths. The group was especially notorious for their machete massacres. After the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front defeated the government, the Interahamwe fled to neighboring countries like Congo, where they continue to engage in insurgencies and acts of terrorism. Los Pepes, short for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, was a paramilitary vigilante group in Colombia during the early 1990s, formed by Escobar's enemies and financed by the Cali cartel. Led by the Castaño brothers, they waged a campaign against the Medellin cartel in 1993, using assassinations and bombings to target anyone connected to Escobar, including guards, accountants, lawyers, nannies, family members, and even teachers, resulting in hundreds of deaths. They dumped the bodies in Medellin streets to terrorize Escobar's allies. They also bombed properties tied to Escobar, destroying his mother's haciendas. The group collaborated with the Colombian police's search bloc and may have received indirect support from the CIA. Their campaign focused on eliminating Escobar's network and pressuring him, which disrupted his ability to conduct his operations. After Escobar was shot in 1993, several Los Pepes leaders went on to help form the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, a paramilitary death squad that later fought both guerrilla groups like FARC and criminal organizations. The Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia was a vast paramilitary network active from 1997 to 2006, notorious for massacres, forced displacement, ties to the drug trade, and the Calabrian Ndrangheta. Formed to combat leftist guerrillas like FARC and ELN, the AUC expanded into widespread terror against civilians, trade unionists, and suspected rebel sympathizers. Its violence was extreme, as seen in the Mapiripan massacre, where they attacked villagers with chainsaws and machetes. Throughout the early 2000s, the AUC carried out hundreds of assassinations, kidnappings, and massacres, allegedly in collaboration with the Colombian military. The banana brand Chiquita later admitted to paying the AUC $1.7 million to secure its operations. By 2006, most blocs had demobilized, and in 2008, its top leaders were extradited to the United States. However, successor groups, such as the Águilas Negras, continue to operate. Mano Blanca was a Guatemalan anti-communist hit squad created in 1966 as a front for the far-right national liberation movement. Originally meant to block Montenegro's presidency, it was quickly absorbed into the military's counterinsurgency apparatus and became one of the most feared paramilitary forces of the Civil War. Backed by the Guatemalan army, government, and US support, Mano Blanca carried out assassinations, kidnappings, and torture against suspected leftists, union organizers, and indigenous civilians. The group was central to rural repression, especially in the Zacapa and Izabal provinces, where up to 10,000 civilians were killed in joint operations. These campaigns marked the early stages of what grew into the Guatemalan genocide, in which over 200,000 people were ultimately killed, with state forces responsible for the vast majority. Mano Blanca earned the nickname Guatemala's volunteer Gestapo for its brutality, operating openly during the regimes of Carlos Arana Osorio and Garcia. It was officially dissolved in 1978, but continued into the 1990s. The Tonton Macoute was a Haitian paramilitary force created in 1959 by dictator François Papadoc Duvalier, designed to crush opposition and keep him in power. Heavily armed, they became infamous for public terror, burning and stoning victims, and murdering between 30 to 60,000 people. They operated outside the law, answerable only to the presidency. The group enforced state terror through systematic killings, torture, and intimidation. Allegedly, US training and weapons bolstered them in the early 1960s, while American companies exploited their presence to suppress peasant resistance. Their terror extended into rural Haiti, crushing peasant movements, silencing the Catholic Church, and enforcing the regime's will. Though officially disbanded in 1986 after Duvalier's fall, former members continued to wield influence. In the 1990s, the FRAPH militia carried on the legacy, with operations even extending into New York, Montreal, and Miami until their disbandment in 1994. The Indonesian anti-communist death squads. In 1965-66, Indonesia saw one of the largest mass killings of the 20th century. Following a failed coup blamed on the Communist Party of Indonesia, the Indonesian National Armed Forces, working with right-wing militias such as Pemuda Pancasila and with backing from the United States and Western allies, launched a nationwide purge of suspected communists and sympathizers. Over several months, between 500,000 to 1 million people were killed. Victims ranged from PKI members to trade unionists, peasants, intellectuals, and anyone accused of leftist ties. Militias attacked with machetes and dumped thousands of bodies in rivers like the Brantas. The campaign destroyed the Communist Party and reshaped Indonesia's politics, ending Sukarno's guided democracy and enabling Suharto's New Order regime, which ruled as a military-backed dictatorship. The FAES emerged as a notorious death squad during the far-left authoritarian Maduro government in Venezuela, accused of carrying out thousands of extrajudicial executions amid the country's 2019 crisis. Eyewitnesses described FAES units arriving in unmarked vehicles, executing male suspects on the spot, and then planting drugs or weapons to justify the hits. Human rights group Provea reported that over 100 people lost their lives in low-income neighborhoods during nationwide protests. A UN report later documented at least 6,800 deaths between January 2018 and May 2019, attributing many to the group, framing the campaign as an effort to suppress critics of the government. The Maduro administration dismissed the report as biased. The Khmer Rouge Doom Squads. When the radical Khmer Rouge seized power in Cambodia in 1975, Pol Pot and the Communist Party of Kampuchea sought to create a classless agrarian society. Between 1975 and 79, their security forces, including the Santebal secret police, systematically hunted and executed class enemies and intellectuals. Even people who wore glasses were targeted as symbols of capitalist influence, while Cham Muslims, Vietnamese, and other minorities faced particular persecution. Victims were sent to the killing fields like Chuang Ek, where piles of skulls remain. By the time Vietnam invaded and ended Khmer Rouge rule, approximately 2 million Cambodians had lost their lives through executions, forced labor, starvation, and disease. The Nationalist Democratic Organization, short ORDEN, was a Salvadoran paramilitary network founded in 1961. Its main purpose was to identify and eliminate perceived communists among rural populations. Headed by General Medrano, ORDEN evolved into government-controlled death squads used to arrest and kill political opponents, peasants, workers, nuns, and priests, sometimes leaving victims mutilated as warnings. At its peak in the late 1960s, ORDEN claimed 100,000 members and carried out widespread terror, responsible for over 10,000 deaths. ORDEN participated in massacres such as the Rio Sumpul in May 1980, where around 600 civilians, mostly women and children, lost their lives. During the Salvadoran Civil War, its paramilitaries continued to target members of the FMLN party and human rights workers. Though officially separate from the government, the squads were largely composed of armed forces personnel and indirectly supported by the US. After the war, most of these groups disbanded, but successors like Sombra Negra remain active as forces against gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18. The Oprichniki were a 16th century Russian death squad established by Ivan the Terrible to eliminate his perceived enemies. This 6,000 strong force dressed in black robes, bearing the insignia of a severed dog's head and riding black horses to instill terror. They carried out public executions, confiscated property, and executed nobles, merchants, clergy, and peasants alike, whoever Ivan suspected of treason. Their most notorious act was the 1570 massacre of Novgorod, where between 2,000 and 15,000 people died. The Oprichniki's reign of terror ended in 1572 after failures such as their inability to defend Moscow from the Crimean Tatars. The Esquadrão Le Cocq was a Brazilian paramilitary death squad formed in Rio de Janeiro in 1965 after the death of Detective Milton Le Cocq. Led by a group of 12 police officers called the 12 Golden Men, the unit was backed by the state's public security secretary and tasked with cleaning up the city by executing suspected criminals, transvestites, and homeless people. Over the following decades, the group became Brazil's most notorious extermination squad, responsible for well over 1,500 deaths in Rio and Espírito Santo. It operated until being dissolved by court order in 2004. Alianza Anticomunista Argentina, or AAA, was a fascist paramilitary death squad active between 1973 and 76, supported by the federal police and armed forces. Allegedly linked to the anti-communist lodge Propaganda Due, it targeted artists, priests, intellectuals, judges, unionists, students and left-wing politicians through assassinations and forced disappearances. Emerging amid rising leftist guerrilla violence, it provided the blueprint for the military junta's dirty war, during which state terror escalated on a massive scale. AAA is estimated to have disappeared more than 1,500 people, often conducting death flights over the ocean. After the fall of its patron Rega in 1975 and Videla's 1976 coup, many members fled to Spain, where they joined death squads targeting leftists during the Spanish transition. The Caravan of Death was a Chilean army death squad, deployed after dictator Augusto Pinochet's 1973 coup, traveling by helicopter across the country between September 30th and October 22nd to execute at least 75 political prisoners. Estimates go up to 97. The operation foreshadowed South America's wider Operation Condor, a coordinated campaign of repression against leftists across the continent. Battalion 316 was Honduras's most notorious death squad during the 1980s, responsible for the assassination and disappearance of hundreds of leftist activists, teachers, politicians and union leaders. Formed with backing from the Honduran government, the unit received extensive training and support from the CIA and Pinochet's Chile. After the Civil War period, many former members were integrated into intelligence and police roles in the administration of President Manuel Zelaya by 2006. Following Zelaya's 2009 ousting, he claimed the squad had been reactivated under a new name, led by former member Billy Joya, resulting in the targeted murders of dozens of government opponents under the Micheletti and Lobo governments. The Rapid Action Battalion is Bangladesh's elite counter-terrorism unit within the police, but it has been widely accused of operating like a death squad. Human rights organizations say RAB carried out large-scale extrajudicial killings against perceived civilian dissidents or political opponents, and enforced disappearances, with estimates of about 1,000 people killed between 2004 and 2008. The Scorpions were a Serbian paramilitary unit created in 1991 by Jovica Stanisic, head of Serbia's state security services, with roots in the Yugoslav People's Army. They emerged during the Battle of Vukovar and were one of many armed groups used by Bosnian and Croatian Serb authorities to terrorize and ethnically cleanse non-Serb populations during the Yugoslav wars. They became notorious for filming their own atrocities, including beheadings and executions, evidence later used in international trials. In July 1995, they participated in the Srebrenica massacre. Then, during the Kosovo War in 1999, they carried out the Pudujevo massacre, murdering 14. Their brutality left hundreds dead across Croatia, Bosnia and Kosovo. The Black and Tans were a paramilitary force recruited from British World War I veterans to reinforce the Royal Irish Constabulary during the Irish War of Independence. Tasked with suppressing the IRA, they quickly gained a reputation for extreme brutality, carrying out random murders, beatings, arson, looting and reprisals against civilians. Villages like Clifton and Knockcrowery suffered particularly harsh attacks, with homes, farms and businesses burned. Their violence was supported by the British administration in Ireland as a method of intimidating the population and discouraging IRA support.